no one can say the United States is at outright war with itself. We're definitely not at peace with ourselves. And so the gray zone is low intensity conflict. So these are forms of conflict or warfare that exist beneath the threshold of conventional war, but above routine peaceful competition. And so we look at Antifa and the broader anti-fascist movement, and it's an idea and a concept. It's also highly organized. So it's not just an idea.
Hmm.
And they, at a minimum, you could say they're a violent social group. They view themselves as revolutionaries, and they talk about insurrectionary violence. And that's what they called their uprisings from really kind of going back to 2015 all through 2021. 2020 didn't stop at the end of the year, continued on in some places into 2021. And so we've just seen this most recent iteration of this insurrectionary violence that's ongoing in Portland. And so uh, that's where we are. And it is not a problem that's going to solve itself. They are, again, a revolutionary group. So they win by toppling the U.S. government.
Yeah, yeah. When you look at Portland, you see a lot of evidence of them planning, of them having proper cells, some leadership structures, a hierarchy, etc., etc. And I mean that sort of negates the point that they're just an idea, rather obviously. But their activity seems to be. I mean, you see a lot of training, in effect. And you kind of see the same tactics here in Britain. You see them with the umbrellas, you see them with the Stonewall silence, you see them with the very calculated, deliberate violence. And none of this is random. I mean, what is the 2015 is sort of when they burst into the scene. They burst onto the scene with the BLM, or the initial stages of BLM. Um, Tell me a bit more about their way of thinking. Tell me a bit more about their training, and tell me a bit more about their financing.
Sure. Well, I would say this is kind of the third iteration of anarchist and socialist violence going back. The first iteration was in the United States, at least, was back in the late 19 teens. And you had anarchist and socialist violence, including they mailed a basically a pipe bomb to the Attorney General Mitchell Palmer at the time, and we deported thousands of them back to Europe. We just told these European countries, we don't want your anarchists and socialists here, have them back.
Right.
And the FBI, it took a while, but the FBI finally defeated that iteration. And then probably a lot of people are familiar with the 60s and into the 70s. That was the second iteration with like Students for Democratic Society and the Weather Underground, the Symbionese Liberation Army, several others. That was finally defeated. And now we're in the third iteration. So there is a doctrine here. These groups have training doctrine, like militaries have. They have a certain way of doing things, and there will be localized adaptations, of course, but they have the zines that they publish and the articles that they publish. They're fairly uniform in how they operate, going down to the basic level of an Antifa group, which is called an affinity group. And this is a group of 5, 10, 15 people, somewhere around there. And affinity groups can link together. You can be a member of several affinity groups, and they go out and conduct direct action. So direct action for us in the military is like door kicking, and they don't do that yet. But their direct action is direct intervention. So they'll go out and do a black bloc demonstration, or they'll go out and smash windows or start fires and just engage in property destruction, arson. Sometimes there have been shootings here in the United States as well, murders, homicides. And so this is why when you look at a black bloc demonstration, they are fairly uniform, whether you're talking about one in Philadelphia or Portland or Seattle or Dallas or wherever. So there is, I would say that's the first thing. There's a very well-established training doctrine of how you do things there. It supports this theory that it is very well organized and coordinated, especially at the lower levels.
And how influenced are they by things like Seven Rules for Radicals and this kind of ideology that tries to sort of keep the opponent off balance? And how influenced are they by this, and how effective has it been, really?
Well, I can't recall specifically them recommending Rules for Radicals, but it is in line with what they want to do in terms of subversion and overthrowing the oppressors. They want to abolish police, abolish prisons, abolish capitalism, abolish all forms of hierarchy, which they say
Yep.
is oppressive. But then they'll also promote manuals like Carlos Marighela's the mini manual of the urban guerrilla, and it's really a proto insurgent movement, but very very insurgent like. So that's there's a handful of other handbooks that they will promote as well, and it's all insurrectionary and insurgent type material.
Okay. Could you dig a little bit deeper into the sort of tactics that they use, and what is the purpose of these tactics? Like when they go and they sort of surround ICE vehicles, when they go and they try to burn down police stations, the objective is genuinely the overthrow of the government, and they think that will lead them on a path where the government reacts and people radicalize, or what exactly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's a term that's thrown around in some areas called revolutionary rupture. And when we look back to 2020, they didn't happen in a vacuum, and it didn't happen in its own. That was the result. George Floyd, of course, was the trigger. But really, that movement had been building since 2015 at least. 2015 is when I noticed them, and there was a white nationalist by the name of Richard Spencer, and there were some other white nationalist groups. This is kind of when the alt-right was rising in the United States. And so they would go and directly confront them and go fight them in the streets and call and get them deplatformed off of social media, and call event venues where speeches were happening. And early on, it was all about deplatforming and not giving any space to white nationalists or to what eventually they would call fascists. And so that's kind of still the bedrock, is not giving space to any kind of fascist or right-wing organizing, any kind of reactionary style politics. And so, I would say that's the bedrock. I'll be honest, I don't look at Antifa. I don't actually think they're a strategic threat to the United States. I don't think they're going to topple. I don't think Antifa is going to topple the federal government, but they are a huge thorn in the side of many locales. And this is something that they are trying to build up to being a strategic threat. Like when we look at insurgencies, there's basically an X and a Y axis, and the X axis, the vertical axis, or vertical ties. And this is how deeply embedded say an affinity group or any kind of insurgent group is embedded into the local community. And in a lot of these places like Portland, there is substantial support, maybe overwhelming support for Antifa. And that's one reason why many of them don't get arrested, or if they do get arrested, they may spend a night in jail, but charges are dropped or they plead down. And so that kind of freedom of movement and freedom of action have probably has a basis in the level of support that they have in these communities. And then there are things called horizontal ties. And this is how tied into they are to other chapters across the country. And so when you have an insurgent movement that has vertical ties and horizontal ties, we call that an integrated insurgency. And Antifa is not an integrated insurgency, at least not yet. So I think that is it's a vulnerability for them, and it makes them strategically ineffective. But really, at a local level, they are a massive nuisance and a big problem, obviously. So, in a big picture, I don't look at Antifa like a big picture strategic threat, but certainly they're trying to be. They're trying to grow into that.
Right.
Oh, so at any rate, I think there's ISIS called it propaganda by deed, and several other insurgent organizations have called it similar. But basically, they go out, and when they go engage in these direct action demonstrations and arson and property destruction, they look at that as a form of propaganda. And so they do that, and they try to build their movement. So that's one reason why they continue to go out, because it will make the news and they will reach people with their message, and they hope to build it. It's just not been incredibly popular outside of places like Portland and Seattle and a handful of other cities.
If you enjoyed this piece of premium content from the Lotus Eaters, head to our website where you can find more.